From corsets and house dresses to pantsuits and tees, 2 centuries of history stitched together, one garment at a time. The New York Historicals exhibit Real Clothes, Real Lives, 200 Years of What Women Wore. The Smith College Historic Clothing Collection invites viewers to explore the lives of everyday women through fashion marked by the passage of time. We spoke with the Associate Director of the Center for Women's History and co-curator of the exhibition, Anna Danziger-Halperin, who explains why these garments are essential to understanding the women who wore them.
They're not your usual kinds of historical objects that you might think of. They're everyday clothing, but we can use them to look back at women's history and see what women's lives were like in the past.
Each stain and stitch gives a glimpse into the style of the time, along with stories of struggle and change. Here, fashion is more than fabric. The exhibit's 5 sections, home, public dress, service, pushing boundaries, and rites of passage, trace how women's roles across race and class have changed and evolved dramatically over time. In home, all work, no pay, visitors can see how domestic labor dominated women's lives.
All of that labor to take care of a home, to feed families, to do the laundry, to mend clothing, it was incredibly time-consuming, incredibly laborious, and often unpaid labor.
One invention in particular revolutionized clothing and helped make women's lives a bit easier. The sewing machine's introduction in the 1850s saved women loads of time. No longer did they have to constantly make and mend clothing for their families by hand. Another section, service, displays the uniforms of caretakers, waitresses, and more from the 20th century.
For World War I, we have an ambulance driver's uniform. It's much softer, it's much more practical for doing that kind of work, which is for the first time really socially acceptable. Yet she's still wearing a skirt. I think that's fascinating, right?
But before wartime, societal rules strictly dictated how women should appear outside the home.
They had to cover their hair with a hat. They had to cover their hands with gloves. Once hemlines began to rise in the 20th century, they had to cover their legs in stockings. So that's one thing, that in order for women to go out of the home and be respectable, they had to keep parts of their bodies covered.
Unlike other exhibits, most of the items in Real Clothes, Real Lives aren't flashy or fancy. They have holes, are faded, missing buttons, you name it. The rawness of Real Clothes, Real Lives shows us just how impactful technology and history have influenced women's lives over the past 200 years, and how it's still changing to this day.
I think there's something about this show that's really empowering, that says, everyday people are worthy of being in a museum and having their stories told.
In addition to everyday clothes women wore, you can find some unusual, not-so-everyday pieces, like the aluminum pull-tab vest made from the tops of cans. The vest and the rest of the exhibition will be on display until June 22nd. I'm Brittany Franco for Arts in the City.